Hello everyone, I'm Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and today we are going to be talking, actually, what does Rocket Lasso do? We do tutorials, we do live streams, and we make tools for Cinema 4D. Now, speaking of tools, we've got a brand new one over here at Rocket Lasso, and it is our brand new voxel mesher plugin. So just for this week of NAB, we've got special 15% off for our brand new tool, and I happen to have a little commercial for it I put together. So let's go ahead and hit this. So we might sneak in a little preview of that at some point in the presentation, but we actually have a lot to get to. But you saw there, the basics of the tool are we're building off of the volume builder workflow, and we then can turn them all into voxels just like you see on the screen here, and then that ties in perfectly with the cloner setup inside of Cinema. So very, very powerful along those lines. All right, so let's jump on into the proper presentation. And today we're going to be talking about 50 more minutes of tips and tricks in Cinema 4D. So my goal here is we're going to be hopping around all over Cinema 4D, different parts that hopefully experts maybe haven't seen, and then some stuff that if you're brand new in the software, you can get a little something from it as well. Now we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump straight in. Can everybody hear me okay? Cool. All right, jumping on in. The very first one is, and this one's really important, is the Rocket Lasso capsules that you might have heard about over the last couple of years are now, almost all of them are integrated into just vanilla C4D. So I'm going to go and pop open a scene file here, just an empty one. And so now if you go in the newest version of C4D, you can click on your deformer menu, and inside the menu, you're now going to see the branch spline modifier, the brake spline, the catenary, electric spline modifier, pulse, dash. We've even got partition. And if you go into your assets browser and you search for the word Rocket Lasso, you're going to see a whole bunch of different example files pop up. Let me make the icons a little bit bigger. All these example files. And if we scroll all the way down, there are additional tools that weren't in that menu. Things like this new constellation modifier. And we should probably spend a few minutes at some point and talk about the weave spline generator that just came out. A handful of these are maybe still Maxon one. I think like the Ivy generator is, but almost everything else is available to everybody. So I actually want to spend a couple minutes talking about a few of these tools because we spent a lot of time working on them. Now I want to add a little bit of clarity where there has been some confusion. Rocket Lasso makes proper plugins and we sell those at our website. But then separately for about 17 months, we've been working with Maxon where every month we were kind of working on a new tool. And that was all entirely built out of like Neutron or the scene nodes inside of Cinema 4D. So those are kind of like little native plugins inside of the software. And it's those capsules that are now going to be available in the C4D subscription. So just to show you a little something here, why don't I pop open something like the electric spline modifier and just show you that I can right click on it, and then you can go down into your menu and say edit asset as group, and you'll see that this is actually all the nodes that we use to build the tool. So inside of it, you can see how many crazy nodes there are, but don't let this be deceptive. I know that can look a little bit crazy, but it gets way crazier because then we got stuff like this group where we go inside there, and then inside there are a lot more nodes, and inside there we've got more nodes, and inside there we might have more nodes. So each of those might be going deeper and deeper and deeper. You see now that we're, what, like 4 levels deep on how many nodes are being used just to make this one little tool. But the idea here is we did all the work in the scene nodes so you don't have to. So you get all the advantage of having your own little custom technical director outside of your own workflow. So let me show you a little bit of what a few of these are doing for us. Now, the electric spline modifier is actually one of my favorite ones. I'm going to create this text spline. Let's go ahead and type in NAB, click to go in the middle, and then let's go and grab that electric spline modifier. So this is my second favorite of all the tools that we made. If I drop it in as a child, immediately you can see this is now deforming this text. And it's making it look like electricity. So these are specifically spline modifiers, and we didn't really have much in the way of specific spline modifiers in the past. Now, there's a bunch of different settings here. Right now you can see it's kind of fading out because tool is kind of, let me show you, it's kind of designed to work with like an open spline. So if I drop that there, you can see that the electricity is traveling from one side to the other. But if you're on something that's a closed spline, then we can activate a couple different settings. Down here I'll say, hey, don't fade out on the edges. And then you're gonna see that where the edge does happen, we get like that one long line where they're kind of can't crossfade between each other, but we made a special control for that called blend to start and end. So just look at this kind of bad corner right there. And as I pull up that blend, it's going to start putting the noise and overlap it, so then it gets repaired. So this is just like a basic, it was built to do like electrical effects just on top of any spline. And we could make a small rig that might make this kind of handy. If you're not familiar with this, as simple as, let's make a null. So I'll make two nulls. I'll call one A, and I'll call the other one B. And let's just scoot one over here. And with both of them selected, I will go to the MoGraph dropdown and make a tracer object. Both nulls got automatically added. And I'll say, don't trace the paths, instead connect all the objects. And now you see I get a line connecting between the two of them. So here's what's cool. If I grab the electric spline modifier and drop it as a child of that, I can now grab, and actually now I do want a little bit of fade on there. So I will say, don't crossfade, yes, just a little bit of crossfading on the edges there. Actually, yeah, we do that and we have the blend. So it's how far do we want to go? I'm gonna say not very much. So now we get this electrical effect. I can grab either one of these nulls and move it around, and you'll see I actually just drag out additional electricity. What's cool about this specific setup is if you've ever tried to do an electrical effect in the past, you've probably done it with like a displace deformer or maybe like a random effector set to deform mode. But the problem with that one is that's creating like a big cloud of 3D noise, and your spline is passing through that noise. So if you ever like moved your electricity, it would go jumping all over the place, very uncontrollable depending on how fast the spline was. But you'll see here, as I move this, you can see that the electricity is super coherent. And actually, as I pull it, you see I'm actually just pulling out additional electrical effects. It's actually pivoting straight from that start point. So this is super coherent. And that's because we coded this not to be based off of like sampling the world's position, but based on the index of the points that are coming into the spline. Now, let's push this effect a little bit further. I'm thinking, let's go back to dropping this on this text object. And it was cool as I literally didn't prepare this part of the presentation at all. I was just like, hey, I'm just gonna show off capsules. They're just super fun. So let's go back inside and scroll down and let's add that. Let's not fade and let's blend them back again. So that's just like the basic electrical effect. But if I scroll through, you see we got all these different settings. We can like push these way out. We've got a sampling step for, we're taking whatever incoming spline is and how often is it subdividing it. And then let's push it further by changing this to some different noise types. So maybe we'll jump this to be a simple purlin noise. And now, like, yeah, we said it's electric, but now we get a totally different sort of wiggling line here. So I could say, well, let's go a little bit easier on that displacement and then grab the noise frequency and start cranking that up. And as I go further and further and further, you see that now I've got these cool squiggly lines instead. But like, let's go back. I'm gonna say, let's simplify that again and make a rather large displacement here. So we got these large wiggles going on, but then I can duplicate my electric spline modifier a second time, and I'm gonna say, hey, I don't even need to resample this time because the previous one did. And then this one, I'm gonna make a way tinier noise and then say less displacement. So now I've got one doing those large movements and a second iteration of it doing these smaller ones. So I could say, hey, that big one, I want that one to be real slow. So I'm gonna say the animation speed is gonna be down at 25%. Another thing that we have inside here, let me show you, is this movement. So I can actually scoot these along the spline, but we can automatically do that. So I'm gonna say over the course of 1 second, I want it to move 50 units. So let's do like 300. And now, let me pull back on that a little bit. You can see that the lines are spinning around the object. I'll increase my noise frequency a little bit so you see it. You see now that we're spinning around. So a completely different type of motion. And of course, I can put that other one back in on top of it and slow them down. another cool thing I have built into this, let's get rid of all that motion that we are already doing. So now we just have a static one, so you could just use it as a normal static deformer if you wanted to. But I'm going to go and grab this animate. And you see we have seeds, so I can keep on typing in different seeds. But under seed, I put a special animate. And what this is going to do is essentially refresh to a brand new seed based on whatever interval you want. So let's say you're making something you want to look a little bit more sketch and toony, and you want the lines to like pop over every couple frames. So I'm going to type in the number 5, so 5 frames, and now every 5th frame is just going to pop to a brand new animation. So I could keep like a little bit of animation speed here, so it's constantly drifting slowly, but now we also get this big pop where it jumps to a completely new random seed. So I really love layering those things up. And this combines so well on top of so many other tools inside of Cinema. Now, I'm going to pop open one of my plugins really quickly, but keep in mind, you can just use Edge to Spline for this. Let me grab a nice big beefy font here, go a little bit deeper. And then now, you know, if you made it editable, you select all the edges, you say Edge to Spline. Well, I'm just going to pop it into my plugin Mesh to Spline, and now we're doing it parametrically. So, and actually, I'll not even drop it in as a child. I will say I want to remote link into it. And now I've got a parametric outline of my object. So I'll say, hey, I'd like to maybe push that outside a little bit, so we'll just expand that a hair. And now let's use that electric spline modifier again. So I'll say, yeah, electric spline, drop that as a child. Let's go back to the Perlin noise, change our frequency a bit. Let's displace just a little bit there. Scroll down, I don't want the fade, I do want the cross blend. Okay, cool, so now you see we've got these lines just kind of wiggling here. Let's speed those up a bit. So look at these like cool wiggly lines right here in the viewport, but I'm going to take that and put it into a sweep, and then we'll feed the sweep also an end side. Let's drop that way down. Maybe like, yeah, let's go actually real thin on that. And we don't need too many sides. And then let's just make a quick redshift material. I just want this to look like ink. So inside redshift, I'll just say no color, no reflection. So now we got a pure black material here. So you see I got these squiggly lines, and I can just start scaling up my end side. And now, not only are we getting a sketch and tune type effect, but we're getting it right here live in the viewport as well. So we can push this further. If we go back into electric spline, scroll down, I can go to clone count, and start increasing that. And now I'm getting multiple versions of the line, each one with a different seed layered up on top of each other. So now just think of like all the different like shaders you could put on top of this. The sweep could be fading out in one direction. We could be having them spin around. And it's actually this technique I used for all the title cards inside of this presentation, is that we can layer these up. And of course the entire rig, especially here with the Rocket Lasso plugin, is parametric. So I can grab my text spline and just type in NAB, exclamation mark, and then automatically everything updates. Now in this case, you can see that edge to spline would be doing all of these edges, but inside of our real plugin, the mesh to spline, I'm going to increase my threshold so it actually gets rid of those soft curves, and now we just get these hard curves going again. So that was, that's not, you know, we barely touched half the settings inside of one of the capsules that's now available to everybody inside of a C4D subscription. I would like to spend just like a minute or two kind of running through the other ones. So let's delete that out. Now I see I've just got the spline on here. So I'm going to grab the catenary spline modifier right here. And this is going to take any spline that you have, and it's going to turn it into melty ropes on everything. So we might want to break that apart a little bit more. So let me open that into, actually I'll just delete everything. Let's make that text spline again. And this will actually show off another one. So here's this text spline. Let's type in NAB again. And if I were to drop the catenary spline in right now, you see the whole thing's going to get really melty. And what's happening is like essentially between every single point, it's melting down. But I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to say, actually, what I want to do is not break per point, but break per segment. Now, if I do that, everything kind of disappears because these whole things are one giant segment. So we're actually going to use a different modifier that we made first. And it is called the break spline modifier. Now, if I create that and put this in, it's going to create, if I zoom up, you see it's actually creating these occasional breaks in our spline. It's making brand new parametric segments in between. So having done that, we can say how many do we want? I'll drop this down to a smaller number like 4. And now, if I'll make a duplicate of the spline so you can actually see where it's pivoting from, turn on the catenary, and now you can see I'm getting these automatic melting lines coming off of that existing spline. So you could, imagine layering this up on top of that tracer technique we just did. You could go and have a bunch of draw wires in between your object and have them melt. We can actually layer catenaries on top of catenaries and have lines on lines on lines. So yeah, that's just a quick one with the brake spline modifier and the catenary. There are a bunch of really cool settings inside of the brake spline where we could do like random animation. One of my favorites is you can click to cut only at the sharp angles. So here you can see actually cuts at every single one of these 90-degree turns and makes it droop from there. So yeah, that's brake spline and catenary. There's a lot more to those as well. Partition, I just got to show this one off real quick. So let's open up a plane and really, actually, let's start with a cube. I'll make a cube and by default you see, no subdivisions. And now we'll make the new partition modifier. Drop that in as a child, and now we're getting all these cool kind of greebly looking subdivisions on it. So I can grab these cuts and start increasing it. And you see I can get more and more of these techie looking cuts. But we can push it, well, first of all, we could keep on increasing this number however far we want. So more and more and more. And we can change how the density is working. So I can say, hey, make it all very even looking. But I can say, hey, randomize where the cut's going to be, or randomize the potential density here. And if I do a lot of density, you can see that we end up with really big blocks, and you can end up with like these really tiny ones inside of it as well. There's animation modes inside here. So many different ways of combining it. Just for fun, I had this in the first presentation, but I'll pop open one of the example scene files from the partition modifier. And I'm always obsessed with like generating cities whenever I can. And so here is just layering up a series of the partition modifiers. And like I just said, these are all about like layering them on top of each other. So this city is just a series of partition modifiers all layered up. And you can see I've got this entire city. I did other little commands so they get beveled, and we get this little extra fun roof that's getting pushed in. The partition can put a gap in between the pieces, so we actually get these city streets in there. And like it's running nice and speedy. I can grab this very first modifier and say, instead of 700 cuts initially, let's do like 300. And now you see that the buildings are going to look larger overall because I did fewer cuts. And just keeping the entire thing nice and clean and parametric. So yeah, partition modifier as well. So that one works on geometry. But as I said, there are a bunch of other ones. I really don't have time to go and show all of them, even at this speed. So the last one I'll pop open is just, let's make a plane. It doesn't have to be a plane, it has to be a regular grid. But I'll subdivide this a few extra times. And now, this one just launched recently. If you go into this menu, scroll down, this one doesn't live in any menu right now, but you grab this weave spline generator. So this is like a brand new generator object that we made to do a technique that I do all the time. And that's, I want to get this woven cloth look. So if I grab this weave spline generator and feed it a regular grid, like drop this inside, you see it gets rid of that geometry, and now I'm getting a spline automatically in the shape of this weave. So let's take that, throw that into this sweep, and we'll feed in a end side, drop that way down, T for scale, and now you can see a little bit better. We've actually got this wonderful weave pattern going. Turn on a little SSAO and click on the weave spline, and it's got a bunch of different settings here. I can inset from the edges. So you can see we get those left over. I can change my weave pattern here. So we can say a twill weave or a hatch weave. So we got a couple different types there. And of course you can go and change the original resolution of your first object. So I'm gonna say drop that down to 22, but then increase the other one to say about 100. And now you can see a very different looking pattern, like almost like a wicker basket looking thing, by just changing the original count in my first object. Let's go back to something reasonable there. Back to default. Now, like I said, this is based off of an incoming regular grid. So let me get rid of these offsets here, and I'll delete out that plane, and instead let's drop in a different regular grid, and that's going to be this disc shape. Let's increase this and open it up and add a bunch of segments. And if you look at this, it's like, oh, well, actually that looks a lot like a plane just stretched around in a circle. So that means it will work with the system. So I can drop that in now, and now we get a weave pattern built off of that. If I could change some settings, we could get those to close. We could build entire like wicker baskets and run simulations on this, have different cloth fall in different places. The scene might be a little bit heavy, but let's see if I can pop open this example file. And so yeah, let me turn off the subdivision just for speed. So what I did here is I made this pattern, and I actually split the weave spline into two different components, like a horizontal one and the vertical one. And then I am just applying I'm sweeping it so we get these flat polygons. And then I'm applying a cloth tag onto both of them. So with zero gravity and a little bit of turbulence, let's go and hit play on that. And now we've got those really drifting around. This is a simulation, but it's on every single individual thread. So you see they can actually drift apart from each other. We could drop this on the sphere. We could add some stickiness. We could add some friction on there. Like, it's so much fun to layer these up and play around. There's additional features in the Weave Spline where we can like erase out like selection tags to have certain parts not be there. Now that we're running cloth on it, we could be like smashing through it with a sphere and ripping it apart because we'd just be using the cloth engine. So yeah, there are more capsules. You should go check them out. We did not even spend any time talking about the branch spline modifier, which is like my actual favorite one that we made. You can pretty much make like any plant that you want parametrically in Cinema, like right here in this thumbnail. I'm not going to open it, but you see this thumbnail of this rose bush. So like you just make any kind of plant setup you want and so much more. So very, very fun. But I just spent way too long talking about the capsules. But the cool thing is that all of you with your C4D subscription now have access to all those ones I showed off. So, all right, let's move on to whatever I have next. I don't even know what comes up next. I want to show this one off again. I showed this one quickly the other day. I just think it's a really neat thing because it's been in Cinema for a long time. I just didn't know it was there. So we're going to be talking about the volume builder and the volume mesher. So here's just some text, and I'm going to drop that inside the standard volume builder workflow. Holding down Alt, it becomes a parent of it. And then I'm going to feed that into a volume mesher, so we actually see the final mesh. And there we go, you can see we got this text here. If I were to grab my text object and start sliding it around, you kind of feel like we're passing through this giant grid, this giant 3D cloud of points. That's how it's actually calculating where the voxels are going to be. So, but of course, here I'm moving my object around. And you can see, well, sometimes the A has the, there's a hole in the A, and sometimes there isn't. So it's like, well, I don't want to move my text. So instead, what I can do is click on our volume builder. You see we have something called the override grid matrix. So if I make a null object and I drop that null inside of that position, I can now grab that null, and instead of moving my object, I can move that cloud of points around. So I just scoot this around until I kind of get to the perfect position, hopefully. Find a good one there. Well, I'm not finding the magic spot to get rid of both of them in this particular case. But yeah, we can move that around and place it perfectly. We can also hit R for rotate and spin it around, and we can actually spin the calculation of essentially the orientation of all these, and you get a kind of a fun, funky pattern on top of it. And keep in mind, this is just like that cloud of points getting rotated in space. But the one I think is the most fun, and that is if we go to our coordinates and say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, I can actually scale this null down, and I'm scaling that cloud of points until they're squishing down. So you see, we've actually got a different density on the vertical plane here than we would, essentially there's no way I could imagine doing that any other way. So yeah, crazy powerful there. And just as a teeny little preview for you, instead of putting this into that volume builder, I'm going to take that volume builder and put it into my new plugin, Voxel Mesher. So we're piggybacking exactly off this system, trying to do the exact same workflow for you. So now if you click the extensions, I can go to my plugin, Voxel Mesher, and now we're returning this as a series of cubes, essentially. Now this one's actually a hollow shell, so if I were to go inside, you're gonna see that we're hollow in there, but we can change this to different modes. Like I can say, hey, give me cube mode. If I shrink this down a little bit, you're gonna see that this whole thing is now made of cubes. Now what's cool about our setup is I can now feed through that same null. So if I click the null, I can scale it down. And this is really, really useful inside of Voxel Mesher. And what's crazy is I didn't even know you could do this until like 2 weeks ago. We've been working on Voxel Mesher for like over a year. So let me start scaling this down. And now you can see we can squish down those cubes to this alternate shape. And it's actually gonna translate really well into the voxel land. Now, what's cool, extra cool here is with a single click, well, let me show you. Voxel Mesher can do the shell, it can do cubes, it can output a series of flat polygons where every voxel is, but it can also output a point cloud for you. So if I go to cube mode, I can click this convert to cloner button, and automatically it's gonna put it in point mode, create a cloner, create a cube, set it to multi, and since essentially a one-click solution, they'll automatically be in the world of MoGraph now. So now, instead of this cube, I'm gonna grab this little brick that I already made. So if I zoom up, we got this little Lego brick going. So let me drop that as a child. And if we zoom up, actually, I just kind of eyeballed it, but pretty much spot on. Now we've got an entire volume of these Lego bricks, all based off the volume builder going into the Voxel Mesher, now into this cloner, and now we're in the world of MoGraph. So I could go and create a random effector here, and now they're all getting exploded out thanks to that. Throw in a field, make a linear field, pass this right through. We could colorize all those. You saw in my demo reel, the Voxel Mesher actually getting all colorized and making just a beautiful, super clean setup. And of course, this entire thing it's all parametric. So I can go and change our text and type in last day, woo, and then automatically everything updates and just working straight through all the systems. So super duper fun. I'm really proud of this plugin. Definitely go and check it out. Picking up our plugins is the best way to support Rocket Lasso. But let's move on into the next one, which is, everyday node capsules. So we're going to be talking about nodes a little bit. Because I think a lot of people don't know that you can use these in very simple, basic ways that are not intimidating. So let's start out real clean here, and I'm going to make a cube, and let's subdivide that cube a couple times, 5 by 5 by 5, and B. So if you didn't know, you can go into your asset browser, click on nodes. Let me shrink this back down a little and view it as a list. And don't search Rocket Lasso. Okay, blank one. We're now in node land, and we've got all these different nodes, but most of these you don't have to worry about at all. The one you want to use is the Geo Modifier tab. And inside here, you're going to see a whole bunch of parametric ways of modifying your objects. Now, a bunch of the Rocket Lasso tools we see are in the menu are living in this menu as well, because those are also modifiers, but think of them as deformers in this context. So even though these are built with scene nodes, we can just use them in the object manager. So to start out here, why don't I grab this inset and drag it in, and now I've got a parametric version of inset. I didn't have to make anything editable. So I could go back and the client has some change. This building's gonna have more windows vertically, or the building is taller. So I can say, be twice as tall, be twice as subdivided, and now my inset is still live. I didn't have to make anything editable. So I just want to show you a little bit fancier of a workflow here. Let me, let's see, do we actually make it as a tool or do it here? Well, I'll manually do it here, where I could say, hey, I want to virtually select all the polygons. Unfortunately, this step's a little bit invisible. I wish there's a way that we could visualize this, but if we go to geometry selection, there's something called select. I can drop that in, and now it's almost like as a command, I can say I want to select my polygons, and what do I want to select? All of them, so I'll type in the word all. Now you can't see it, but now it's selected all the polygons, kind of in node land. So now that I've done that, I can go back to my geometry, and let's do something like that inset again. So let me grab inset, drop that after, and you see everything's inset, doesn't look different, but now I have the ability to do additional things. I'm actually gonna hide this because I can find them faster with the commander. So let me hit, let me search for just an extrude. So we've got a parametric extrude right here as a node operator, and if I drop that on, you can see that everything I inset is now getting extruded. And then we can duplicate that inset again, so now we're insetting, and then I can make a delete. So I'll search for the word delete, and now I've got a parametric version of delete, so I can drop that on and delete those out. I was able to stack all those up, and now that we've got this as a hierarchy, I can go back through, and let's say, this is supposed to be for a client, and they want this to be a building, and these are different windows that we're looking at. I can grab my original inset, which is probably working pretty well. I can say don't be proportional, instead be this like uniform amount. I can say be exactly 3, and then the window should probably extrude, but not so much, so we'll pull back on that. And then we'll do a small inset again, and that one, that's actually pretty good. Let's do another extrude, and this time I'll go -4 on my extrude, and then I'll turn on that delete. So very quickly, I was able to modify that and add a whole bunch of windows here, and now I can go back and say, okay, but the initial windows should be a lot smaller, so I'll shrink those all down. And I can make, go back to the cube and make changes on that. Say, there's fewer of them, so now we can get these slightly more vertical windows. So we're using nodes, but right here in the object manager, so you don't have to be intimidated by them. And now that you've seen the way a couple of those basic ones work, you can actually build your own tools out of it. So let's go and delete all of those. I could reference them, but I think I'll remember well enough. If you go back into the asset browser, I'm going to go up to a different menu called Asset Construction. And this is the first step with all those Rocket Lasso tools that we're putting there, is what type of tool do we want to make? So you can see we make distributions, we can make meshes, we can make splines, but I want to make a nodes modifier. So if I grab that, drag it in, and drop it in the object, all I have to do is double click on it, and now we are inside of a deformer, essentially. So now that we're inside of here, you can see we've got an input called geometry, so that's coming in, and we can say we're going to change it somehow, and then output geometry. It's as simple as that. So if we could do the exact same setup that we had just done, so if I double click and search for, we'll just do a couple here. I'll search for inset and drag that in and say, okay, geometry to inset to output, and now you see we've got the inset. Now I'll double click and search for the word extrude, and if you drop it directly on a wire, it'll actually interject directly into it. So that has now gotten applied, and now we are extruding. And we could, remember that select I did? I probably want to do that. So let me double click and search for the word select, and make sure I grab the correct one right here. Interject it, say select edges, and I'll say all. And now, you see the difference once that's happened. And then of course, we could duplicate the inset, relink it, push it. So anyway, you see how those are all layering up on top of each other. And if you select all your nodes, you can hit the letter L and actually arrange them the best that I can. But now I can close this down, and now I've got a nodes modifier that's doing all those multiple steps. All the exact same stuff we did in the object manager, but now we've built it as its own little tool. So if I were to do something like yank that out from a cube, and instead we make a sphere, I can drop that onto the sphere, and it's getting applied there. And then just as a last step, if you want to, I can go into the tool, go into the inset and say, well, I want to control this percentage. So if I hold down control and I click on this dot here, it's going to output, you're going to see that that parameter has now popped out onto the node. So now I can say, I want to output that into an input. So I'll drop that in. Let's grab our extrude, and we'll also pop that out and say, I want to control that offset. And we'll just leave it at those two. So now if I go click on my nodes modifier, those controls have now propagated up to the top. I've built my own little plugin for myself, and I can now play with that inset. I can play with this offset and have those push further. We could add variation. We could layer and layer and layer. And you start out with something like that, and you can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and eventually you can build polygons from scratch, and all the crazy stuff you saw Rocket Lasso doing. And there's so many organizational tools, and you can put things in groups, layer and layer and layer. And then just go ahead and save this into your asset browser, and you can just keep it forever. But anyway, just a little bit about some of the scene nodes. There are so many other useful ones. I guess the last one I'll mention, just because it's so handy, and if you don't know, you're gonna love it, is we just make a plane, and here's our sphere, and I want my sphere to stay parametric, but I want it to be sitting perfectly on the ground. Well, if you search for the word axis, there's something called geometry axis. If we drop that as a child, you just go deform into the new position. We didn't have to make it editable, and now it's pivoting from where I want it to. If I select the sphere, my axis is still on the ground, but the sphere is sitting up properly. But of course, that setting we could go and say modify it, so it's actually going to be sitting under the ground, or we could be offsetting it in some other orientation. And there's so many other nodes that you can drag into the object manager that you should just go into the menu and check them out, because so many of these you might be like, oh, I didn't even know I could do that parametrically. Or some of these are functions that we didn't have, like this axis, or there's like a resize one. Say, I want my object to be exactly the scale on Y or Z. It just layers and layers and layers. So definitely check them out. Very, very powerful, not intimidating. All right, moving on. What do we got? I don't even know. Oh, re-effector. Okay, this one's kind of fun. All right, so for years I was like, I don't have any use for the re-effector. Why would I ever use a re-effector? So we'll explain exactly what it is as we go. Here we've got that elephant from the asset browser. I love using this elephant. We're gonna throw that into a subdivision surface. Just do one layer. And now let's throw this whole thing into a Voronoi fracture, which I love Voronoi fracture too. So now it's breaking this apart into different chunks. But if you didn't know, this is really fun. You can go to our actual sources, and right now there's this random point generator, which of course is how you make a bunch of random ones. But I can delete that out and not make any cuts on the elephant. And I'm going to say, how do I want to cut it up? Well, I want to cut it up by feeding it its own mesh. So if I drop in its own mesh, you can see that we get this really, really cool pattern based on the incoming geometry. So if you were to deform that elephant's geometry in all sorts of crazy cool ways, like maybe triangulating it or subdividing it in different ways. And I've got an entire tutorial actually about like different ways of parametrically layering up modifications on your mesh, like doing little point bevels and changing the pattern. All of those will change the pattern that we put onto this elephant. But that's not the goal of this particular section. What I would like to do in this rig, and it's not an uncommon thing I want to do, is I want to take all these clones and push them out from the elephant, essentially have them shoot out from the normal direction of the elephant. But there is no setting inside of the Voronoi fracture to do that. Essentially, they all just have their own axis that's perfectly, zero rotation. So to show you, if I were to grab the plane effector and go to push it out, usually if you want to push out, you go on Z. So I'm going to say push out on Z, but you see there's the whole elephant moves in that same direction. So we don't have that relative orientation. So here's what I'm thinking. The first thing we'll do with this rig is rotate it. So I want to rotate it using the target effector. So if I grab the target effector, everything is now rotating. Oh wait, I need to close my polygon holes. Optimize and close holes, and now you're gonna see that we get chunks from it instead of just that empty shell. So now we've got these all rotated. Now here's something that's cool. If you didn't know, incredibly powerful. It's a dangerous rabbit hole. But inside the target effector, usually you're just like trying to target an object, where you're just like, oh, look at the camera or something like that. But there's a mode called use field direction. So if we say use field direction, suddenly this field list is allowing us to give these custom orientations all based on like whatever we want to feed in. So if we put a random, all these will be trying to target a random direction. But what I want to do is, again, target the elephant itself. So if I drop that in and say, yes, target the points, and I'm going to increase this radius a whole bunch. So now it's going to look a little bit crazy, but now all of these have rotated to aim at the original orientation. Essentially it's now based on the normal of the elephant. It looks really crazy, but hopefully now if I grab my Voronoi fracture and I make that plane effector again, just like we were doing, now if I say don't push that on Y, but push that on Z, everything's pushing out from the elephant instead of straight up. So it's like, okay, oh, that's great. This is exactly the type of effect I want to do, but now everything's rotated all crazy. I don't want it to be rotated crazy. Well, that's where the re-effector comes back in again. So if I grab the Voronoi fracture and we feed in the re-effector, I can now drag this down. What the re-effector does is essentially it can erase out elements of what came before from the effectors. So I'm going to say, I want to keep my position, so I'll turn that off, but I want to override that rotation. So now I've actually rotated all of those back to their original orientation. So you see, rotated correctly, but now we can push out from the elephant. So we can now take, we can take this effect now. I'm going to say don't colorize. So we'll turn off colorize fragments. We'll have them push out pretty far. And let's go under fields and throw in a random field. Let's make something like a Luca noise. I will crank up the scale until I start seeing some coherence there. The cloud of noise is getting really big. And then I just want to add some animation on there and probably remap it. So I will grab curve and start clamping this in. So only certain parts of the elephant are going to want to push out in any given moment. So now if I play, okay, going a little fast, but let's grab that random, slow it down. And now we can get this crazy like digital effect on the elephant where all of the parts are moving out. Let me make it even larger. Yeah, so like all these parts moving out of the elephant, drifting just far enough away. So that's, first of all, a really cool use for the target effector, but also using the re-effector to get our rotation back to exactly what we wanted it to be. Here we go. And then let's see how close I got to the final. Yep, pretty close. I just subdivided more. All right, moving on. Okay, quantize and delay. This is a kind of a specific technical rig that I like to use, and it's always tricky to think of like specific use cases until you need it. So I just want as many people to know about this technique as possible. So what am I talking about specifically? Well, if we were in, so here we have just a simple matrix object. Let me turn this off so we can go step by step. So I've got, actually we'll even delete that. So we've got a matrix object and it's just set to grid and we've got 40 along one direction. I'll make a plane effector. They're all pushing up now. And in the plane effector, I make a random field. So random field, that's cool. I probably want to make them all individually calculated so I can say randomize sample positions, give it some animation speed, hit play. And now you see they're all drifting, they're all doing their own thing. But what I really want them to do is kind of look like they're hopping off of the ground somehow. So we could remap that, which I will. I'll grab a curve and pull this way down. So you see most of the time they're going to be really on the ground, but every once in a while they're going to be hopping up into the air. Now the problem is that they're hopping in the air and they don't always get all the way up, and they're also moving at different speeds. And I have a rig that I just need the cloners to be random, but have a consistent speed constantly moving. So this is where the quantize and delay technique comes in. So I've got this lovely remap noise here. I'm gonna make sure that it's got a little bit clamped and it's moving around, cool. So now I'm going to put in a quantize modifier. So where is it? It is right here, quantize. And think of this like a posterize effect in Photoshop, where we can say how many times are we taking this 100% and slicing it apart into different sections. So right now it's always kind of like one number higher than it says. So there's 4 steps, but on both sides of it, so it's actually 5. So I can drop this all the way down to 1. So I'm saying there's 2 steps, essentially 0% and 100%. So you see it's just popping to a final position and then back down again. It's on or it's off. So now that that's happening, I'm going to say, let's make another modifier. So that's the quantize part of it. And now we make a delay. And now this is saying, take your previous value and now take my current value and transition to it in some way. So especially if I were to make a linear here, you can see now that these are moving, we're driving this from noise, but they're moving in a perfectly linear way. They're all moving at a constant speed. So we could change this linear however we want. The higher we go, the slower those will move. And the quicker the smaller the effect strength, then the quicker they're going to be transitioning between their positions. And now we've got that. We could layer up additional things. I could layer up a lovely delay set to spring. So, and let's unclamp it now. So now it's going to be shooting and overlapping, but those are all moving at a constant rate now. So pretty often I run into times where I want to have this type of rig where I want some sort of constant speed. But here's one example of a time you might want to do it. But again, don't think of it just as, well, we're going to make popcorn. Don't think of this just as a technique to make popcorn. Think of it as a way of making randomness be uniform in its speed and wherever that might be applicable. So let's go, and we've got this matrix doing its thing. So why don't we make a cloner, and here's my popcorn. So I'm going to activate this just so we don't have to make it. So you see, I've just got a sphere. Let's activate these one by one. I've got a sphere. I'm tapering it, and then I'm using a bulge deformer on it, and then I'm using this plane effector, and eventually we're going to apply the strength of this plane effector. Let's see, that's a random field. Yeah, actually, yeah, we just need to apply the power of it, which is keyframed. Yeah, so it is keyframe right now. If I go forward a couple frames, there is this plane effector just using random noise, and you see it's deforming into a popcorn shape. Okay, so we drop that into the cloner. I can say, okay, the cloner will clone not onto a grid, but onto an object. What object? Well, I'll just do the matrix object. I was able to use the matrix object to build a simple version of the rig, and now the cloner will actually take on the effect. So I could visually hide the matrix, it's just if I don't want it in the way. So now I've got all these little bits of corn. So if I were to hit play, you're gonna see that all of them just pop immediately. So I don't want them to pop immediately. So I'm actually gonna go into this matrix object and say, go under transform, and right now, your actually, I guess the cloner is the only one with the animation tool, which is fine. I'll click on the cloner, and in the cloner under transform, you can see that we have an animation mode, and that animation mode is set to play. It just means it's gonna play the animation of your clones. I'm gonna say, no, I don't want you to play the animation. I'm gonna say, your time is fixed. So now if I hit play, they don't move because the time, essentially their individual little timelines aren't moving forward anymore. So instead, I'm gonna say, I wanna control your time. How do I wanna control your time? I'm going to go back to that plane effector that we had, and we're moving up on Y. I'm going to say, don't move up on Y. We're not worried about that anymore. Instead, I want to be doing a time offset. So how long is the animation of the corn? Let's click on that, and you can see that is going 0, 1, 2, 3. So I want to offset 4 keyframes here. So in my plane, I will offset time by 4 keyframes. And now, if I hit play, you can see that in different bits of popcorn are all popping into their final shape, and they're all going to be doing it at a constant speed. But of course now they're popping in and then they're popping back out again. We don't want that. So let's go into that plane. Let's go into this plane effector. And yeah, that's how they're popping. So now let's rearrange this stuff a little bit. So we've got our linear speed, which I like that linear, but once it gets up to that final value, I want to stay at that final value. So there's another modifier I love, which is this decay. So right now, the default decay is saying, hey, you get to a certain value and it's gonna fade out, and get to a certain value and then fade out. So at the default, you're gonna see that when I hit play, it's gonna hit a large value and then more slowly shrink down. But if I crank this all the way, it can never shrink down again. So now they're all popping to a particular, they're all popping to their final state at a constant rate based on random noise. And if we make our timeline long enough, eventually all of those will pop. So pretty much exactly what I want to have happen there. Let's make a couple different varieties of this popcorn. So I'm going to copy the sphere and change the random seed. And let's do that again. Change the seed, do it again, change the seed, just so we get a couple different pieces of popcorn so they don't look so absolutely identical. And now they're popping, and they're popping at a constant rate. Well, I mean, just in general, I imagine popcorn's popping at a pretty constant rate, but why do I want it to be so uniform in its speed? Well, so I can run some simulation on it. Let's go and create, actually I'm gonna search for the word floor, which is not in the menu anymore, but here's the old floor, so we can use a bullet simulation. I'm using the bullet simulation just because some of these are intersecting a little bit, and because it's gonna give us like really clean, accurate bounces off this floor. So all I'm gonna do is go on to my spheres here. Actually, we can do it straight in the cloner. I'm gonna right click and say bullet rigid body, and I'm gonna grab this floor and say bullet, well, also rigid body. And now these are all, they should all be dynamic. I'll grab my matrix objects, stretch them apart from each other a little bit. We are passing through that cloud of noise, but there we go, nice position there. So now if I hit play, any given moment, the popcorn is gonna be popping at a constant rate, and you can see it's hopping off the ground a little bit. So either I could speed up the popcorn and say pop faster, which maybe that'll work. Let's go and grab that plane. I actually can rename this to plane.time because that's what I'm affecting with it. My caps lock's on, that's fine. I'm gonna say you're offsetting time, but I wanna go even faster. I'm not sure if this will work, but I'm gonna say do 8. So let's reset there. And now the animation is happening twice as fast because I doubled the speed. So you see the popcorn is jumping up higher. But what will help even more here is if I go and say, go to Control or Command D if you're on a Mac, and go to your simulation, I think so, bullet, go under bullet, and then under your expert, here are our steps per frame. And right now it's every single frame that goes is checking 5 times. But I'm gonna say I want that way more accurate. So I'm gonna jump that up to 25. And now it's just checking those collisions a lot more accurately. So now you see our popcorn's gonna be taking off because really accurately, it's like, oh, I'm intersecting, like go and have it shoot off into space. So now we've got all this corn popping. We can modify the rig now however we like. Go to my object here. Let's say this is gonna be a radial. And let's start again here so I actually see them. It's a radial. Let's increase the radius and let's make way more corn here. Maybe even more. Maybe scoot the whole thing up in the air a little bit. And hit play. Some of the corn's already popped, but now we've got all this corn leaping, and they'll, it's dynamic, so they'll run, they'll bounce into each other. Some will knock other ones out of the way. We could be running, we could use the same effect to like colorize the corn to be different colors depending on if it's in one state or the other one. But yeah, that's just one example of why you might want to have like randomness, but in a constant speed. So yeah, and all thinking about all of those different effectors, the quantize, the curve, the delay, the decay. They layer up in so many fun ways. Like I just recommend popping them open and playing around with them and seeing what they can do for you. Because there's not gonna be a tutorial for absolutely everything in the world. So the best thing that you can do is just be like, oh, I know the delay exists now. I know it's gonna take the value that's going between 0 and 100%, and it's gonna make it slowly fade out instead of instantly fading out. And just keep those types of things in mind. But anyway, there you go, little popcorn rig. And then here you can see the same one, just colorized now via the cloner. I think I'm colorizing, it's a cool thing. If you feed a bunch of effectors into a group, I didn't know this, in the group itself, you can do a color remap. So now I'm saying when they are unpopped, they are this color brown and they're gonna get to this really light yellow. We hit play, we're in a little bowl right now, exact same, literally same step we just had. So give them a second and now they're going to start popping. And I put a little invisible wall here so they're all popping. But actually it's really fun because you see as they pop, they're actually smacking the other seeds around and colliding into each other. So yeah, really, really fun. All right, moving on. What do we got? Okay, colorized smoke. Let's jump on in. A lot of people might know about this. If you watch my What's New videos, you probably know about these types of things. But we've got pyro in Cinema 4D. But personally, I use it more often just to do really cool like smoke effects and fire specifically. So I thought we'd just sort of play around with that. So I've got this construction worker doing a little swing dance right from Mixamo. I have to put in the Connect. Unfortunately, the Connect is making them run kind of slow. But I just want the entire body, so we're just gonna let that happen. So I'm going to start by making a vertex map on this. So right-clicking on the Connect, I will say Other Tags and Vertex Color. Inside of the Vertex Color map, this is now, if you're not familiar with it, on every single point of the character, it's saying I'm going to assign some sort of color to it. So we could, if you didn't know, you can like double-click on that. If this is actually, it has to be editable for the painting. But if it was an editable character, we could drop that on and paint directly on it. So I'm going to do this a little bit more parametrically. So we've got a field here. So I'm going to actually go a little crazy and make a shader field. And in the shader field, I'm going to go and search for, do I already have it? Yeah, here are the materials that came in from Mixamo of the character himself. So I'm just going to grab the color channel, the diffuse, and feed it through the vertex map. And let's see. Oh, no, what's going on? I feel like I should be seeing it. I can just make that again. Something was being weird. Right click, other tags, vertex color, shader field, and let me just manually go and track down that material, make sure, yeah, I'm grabbing that one. There we go. Okay, so now this is not a material on the character. These are the points of the character themselves getting color applied. So now that I've got a color vertex map on there, let's go onto this Connect, right click, and add a simulation pyro. So here's a pyro emitter, and right now if I hit play, I'm running off a laptop here. And remember, he's already running slow, but you see we got the fire, we get the smoke and whatnot. It's gonna be following the character as he moves around. let's simplify a little bit. I don't want any temperature. I don't want fire, but I do want this density. But the main thing I want is color. So I'm going to say I want to colorize the density, colorize the smoke. So let's twirl that down. And under this little twirl down, I love they started hiding all these little twirl downs all over the place. And usually that means you can sneak in a vertex map or a color vertex map. And it just adds so much more power because those, the vertex map and the vertex color map are like these universal translators in cinema to get data from one object to another. Yeah, we've got that fed through. We are now dropping, we're feeding in the color, twirl down the color, and I'm going to feed it that vertex map that we just made with the color of the character. Now, from some testing, I just know I want to drop my density. How much smoke am I getting? I'm going to drop it down to 0 add, and I'm just going to say, was it 0.1 or 0.01? I don't remember. Let's just try 0.1. It'll probably be too much. So now if I play, you see I'm generating a cloud. Oop, let me hide the skeleton as well. I'm generating a cloud of colored smoke around the character. That's totally working for me there. Why don't we put a little bit of forces in here? So I'm going to make a simulation forces turbulence. And I think we're going to go pretty extreme here. So I'm going to make it relatively large. The scale is like a cloud of noise. And let's make the strength like 55 maybe. Let's just see if I can get a vibe for it.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I might want 555. I always, if I'm not seeing what I want to see, I always go times 10. So yeah, now you can see, oh, and the turbulence is really big, so I'm going to drop that back down. Yeah, right now all the smoke is blowing forward. I shrunk it down now, so now it's actually going to be looking kind of smoky, and it's drifting all over the place. Excellent. So yeah, that's a very simple way of getting some crazy motion graphic-y looking smoke on top of a character, translating his material into a vertex map, and then translating that directly into the color of the smoke. But let's go a little bit further on that, and I'm going to take this pyro output. So here's where your pyro actually lives, and let's feed this into a volume builder. So actually, no, we can put that straight into a volume mesher. So right now, it's not meshing anything, and it's because we have to click on our pyro output and say, actually, output the density of the character. So now you can see that's being fed through, and if we click on our volume mesher, we've got this very important voxel range threshold. So I can say, well, how far through that cloud of smoke do I want this to be getting applied? So as I drop this down, you're going to see that we're seeing a lower and lower threshold, and eventually we're getting this giant cloud of smoke everywhere that the character was. And then, immediately, why don't we right-click on that volume mesher? Actually, yeah, I'll right-click on that volume mesher and make another, I'll make another vertex color map. But what do I want to reference? Well, I want to reference a pyro object again. So I'm going to say, actually, also put out the color from it. So I'm going to say, yes, give me color. Inside of this vertex map, I'll drag in the pyro output, and I'll say, yes, see those colors, but I don't want to see the density. I just want to see the color in this case. So now we're translating the color of the character through onto this volume builder. So as he moves, I think I said I probably had the volume too thick. I probably do. Let's try 0.01.
And done.
Try that again. Threshold might be a little too mild now. Let me select that vertex map. Yeah, there we go. So that's a little cleaner. If we select that vertex map, we can change the sample mode to linear, and that's going to give us a lot smoother version of the color. And if I wanted to get it really smooth, I like making a second vertex map. Make sure you give it a different color. Cinema bases the vertex maps often off of the name of the object. So in this one, instead of referencing the original noise, I'm going to reference my previous vertex map. And now I can say, don't just look at the nearest one, average them out. And now I can increase this. It's almost like we get a nice little Gaussian blur type thing. So I can blur those all out a little, make that look really, really smooth. And then we're losing a little bit of saturation. So if you have Rocket Lasso has another plugin that we sell called Field Pack 1 and Field Driver. So we actually have something called the Rocket Hue Saturation Brightness. And if I create that, I can actually increase the saturation here on like any cloner, but anything that you can be fed, feed fields in. So I can bring back the saturation there. I could increase the brightness a little bit on it overall. We can even shift the hue around and make some crazy colors on it. And it's really fun to keyframe this and have it like do this crazy rainbow effects. But yeah, now we've got all of those translating all the way through onto this character. The information getting propagated through. We could feed this through into Redshift with a vertex node inside of there and make like a crazy waxy material. So now we've made a dancing character in the smoke, and we've made that smoke into this crazy blobby effect. And however we want to modify this, we grab our turbulence, make the turbulence effect a little bit larger, see a little bit more coherence on that. We have gravity having, actually that would be kind of fun. Let's make a quick gravity. And actually I'll just make a wind. Give this a pause. We'll make a wind and aim downward and have it fall away a little more quickly. I'm not sure what value, so I'll try 55. Let's see if we feel it falling. I'm gonna go higher, let's do 300. Select my vertex map again, and now he's all melty and they're drifting away, but now gravity is constantly pulling it downward. That wind is saying blow down. We get this crazy melty effect. So you can imagine so many different things you can layer on top of there. So nothing specific here, just some cool techniques that you might be able to apply to some crazy project or client request that you wouldn't have known how to do otherwise. Look at him go. And we can even change like the sampling so you can get the in-between keyframes. So yeah, a lot of fun things you can do there. It's just fun seeing the character get abstracted to this point. Let's see, jump here. There's the, yeah, that's just a completed one if we were going to get to it. Oh, okay, cool. This is actually going to be, we're reaching the end here. So I want to talk about this one. I think it's actually really neat. So a couple versions ago, we got custom normal tags inside of Cinema. And in the video, I was like, I feel like there's some really cool stuff you can do with this. I just don't know what. And now I know of one cool thing that you can do. So here is kind of a little anime character that I've got. And it doesn't look very anime right now. It still looks very, very 3D. So there's a couple different things we need to do. So one thing we want to do is probably make this look a little bit more like cartoony by putting an outline on it. So I'm actually going to use one of my plugins here. We're going to use it pretty mildly, but I just love this effect, so I gotta show it off, sorry, if you'll indulge me. I'm gonna make that mesh to spline that we talked about a little bit earlier, and I'm gonna say I wanna remote in and link to certain objects. So I'm gonna say I would like to link in on the hair, and I wanna link in on the overall face. So I'll grab the subdivided head. So now you see all those are being converted, oh, and the collar, why not? You can see these are all being converted parametrically to splines, but we have a special mode inside of mesh to spline, and that is outline. And this is now based on the angle of the camera, only the things that are essentially perfectly moving away from the curve where you are. So if I were to make this editable, actually it's gonna look really crazy. Let me show you. If I make this editable and spin around, you can see the splines are all super crazy. But when you're viewing that perfectly from any given angle, it looks like you've got these perfect outlines. So let's feed that into a sweep, drop that way down. We don't need much on there, so I'll shrink it down. T for scale. And let's make a black line material, apply that. And now I've got this lovely cartoony outline on the character. And as I rotate my camera, you can see it's updating. Now it's jittering around a little bit. We can improve that if I take that mesh to spline, take that raw line, and I'm going to feed it into another Rocket Lasso plugin. Apologies. Feed that into smooth. And the smoothing is taking that line and is constantly smoothing it out. So I'm going to say counter scale back to the original thing. But now you can see it's really smooth those lines out. So now as I rotate around, I mean, I kind of like the jitter, but as I rotate around, we can get these different effects on the character. Let me smooth it even more. I might even do a step subdivision and then do a few extra subdivisions on there.
Oh, we're now on us.
So yeah, as I rotate around and we view different parts, we can see, oh, let me get rid of max length. There we go. 3 or 4, yeah. So now we got our little outlines. But now, as I rotate around, you see if we go to the correct angle, the chin will just kind of erase out. You get all these really lovely effects. Rotate to the side, you get the perfect silhouette of the face of the character. Let's not smooth too much. Okay, so having said that, let's talk about the normals of the object. So how do you get a normal tag? Well, the easiest way is to grab a Phong tag that's on any object that's been made editable. And I'm gonna say create normal tag. There's just a button. So I create that, and now we can move that, in this case, up to so, excuse me, karaoke.
Wait for the pod.
Okay. So now I've got, whoa, okay, my voice is fully dying. All right, I'm gonna try and get the mic real close and talk a little more softly. Okay, so we've got this vertex map here, or this, wait, I dragged the wrong one. That was a Phong tag. I need to drag the normal tag up here. Does that work, or do we need to be on the face itself? So, oh yeah, so transfer, I'm gonna say I want to replace whatever the normals of this whatever the normals of this are with fields instead. As soon as I do, it suddenly looks really different. So right now this is just kind of in world space, but here's the technique I want to show. If we make a sphere, and I'm going to scale that sphere way up and visually hide it, I'm going to say in my normal map, don't use the existing one, instead reference this sphere. So I can grab sphere, I'm going to say look at the surface of the sphere, and I can start increasing this radius, and eventually you see it kind of drifted in right there? So now, essentially I'm saying, yeah, you're in this face with all this complex geometry, but I want you to be shaded as if you're the same as this sphere. So you see it's a little blotchy right now, so let's just grab our sphere and increase our subdivisions. You see it gets nice and smooth there. And now, take a look. Let me shrink that down, a couple subdivisions. Now, look at how much cartoonier that looks. It's still getting all of that shading. In fact, why don't we make a redshift light right here? So that's gonna look funky, but let's hit R for rotate, spin it off to the side, scoot it over. And now you see we're still getting highlights, we're still getting shadows. Let's pull back in the exposure there a little bit. So we get, we still get light, we still get shadow, but everything's so much flatter. And you look at the character and suddenly that's starting to pop like it's a little bit more cartoony. And let me just show you, if we go and we say, hey, don't put the outline on there, don't use the custom normal, suddenly it's like, wow, this is suddenly so 3D. But you just do those two effects, put the line on it, put that custom normal on, and suddenly we're getting something really cartoony. And again, like really fun, if you want to get those types of lines and outlines in Redshift, we can just do that automatically with this mesh to spline. So I think we've timed this stuff almost perfectly. I'm going to close this one out, and here's the final version. I think I did a slightly better version of the outline settings here, because you can see the lines are a lot smoother as I rotate around the character. So what did I do? Oh yeah, I did subdivide it and then just a little bit of iterations on it. So you see just smoother lines. I love the way the nose pops in. Like you actually get this really, it's like the way you would get those kind of like stylized anime characters where the nose looks good there. As I rotate up, we get that button nose. If we rotate to the side, we get that perfect profile of it. So yeah, I just love this combination of things. And again, keeping it all clean and parametric. And then even that, if we wanted to add extra jitter, we could take the electric spline modifier and make those lines all jittery on top of there. Like you just layer and layer and layer. And yeah, here you can see really well how that lighting is getting the definition of the face, but is nice and smooth, like a soft gradient across the entire thing. So yeah, just a really fun way of using that normal tag and customizing it to be controlled. We essentially, I kind of already showed you earlier on how I went and made all these stylized titles. Just a couple little tips on top of this. I'm just making a custom material in here. So what I did is I just made a simple gradient. And you can use a ramp directly as a gradient, but it doesn't show up in the viewport. So I just, in Photoshop, made a ramp, feeding that through. But now that I did, I can colorize it with a ramp, ironically. So I could just colorize, this to be, let's say it's gonna be pink and purple. And now I've changed the color of the text there. And we can grab our electric spline modifier just like earlier, and I can scale it up to be larger, make them look all crazy. And the reason it's looking so nice here is I actually added a bunch of transparency into my material. So that's another variable. So I'm actually seeing through a bunch of layers of it. And let me show you, by default in Cinema, if you go Edit, Preferences, under Viewport Hardware, there's actually a setting called Transparency Max, which by default set to 2. So you can see what's set to 2, we start getting like all these like kind of ugly jitters there. But you can start to increase your transparency, and this is for the viewport. So as I increase it, you can see that it's able to look through more layers of transparency. And now those look really clean, even here in the viewport. And from my testing, not much of a speed hit. So yeah, making those look really cool. So a fun way for me, at least, to make presentation titles. So yeah, let's close that up. That was if we were making from scratch, but we did it earlier. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, everybody, for coming and checking out my presentation. And of course, we do have that 15% off sale for Voxel Mesher just the week of NAB. You can use code BLOCK to go and pick it up. Just go to rocketlasso.com, and I've got links all over the place of where to go find it. Worked really hard on it, really excited to see what people make. If you do pick it up, make something cool, make sure you send a message to me. I'm at Rocket Lasso on all the different platforms, so track me down there. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
And so, all right, thank you, Chris. Amazing as always. Stay tuned, folks. We're going to be back here in another 10 minutes with our next presenter. Chris will be available for questions just right at our demo stations too. So if you want